Hello, and welcome to this episode of Trident Talks. I'm Rosie, a senior associate over at Trident, and I'm delighted to be joined by the founders of Privaclave today, Amit and Sid. Now, before I jump in and ramble on, because I can definitely do that, I'm sure the listeners would much prefer to hear from you guys a little bit about your background and the founding story of Privaclave.
Sure. Well, thank you, Rosie. It's a pleasure to be here today and speaking to you and talking about, obviously, a lot about data security and Privaclave. Yeah, so my background, I'm Sid Dutta, the founder and CEO of Privaclave, and been in the industry for 25 years now. Last decade and couple, years been in cybersecurity and specializing in data protection. My journey started back at American Express, and where I was leading a data protection program. Then moved over to WorldPay, one of the largest payment processors in the world, as global head of data protection and applied cryptography. Went on the vendor side to lead product management for data security product, and eventually went back on the enterprise side as VP of Data Protection and Privacy Engineering at Activision Blizzard King, now, of course, part of Microsoft Gaming. So over the last decade, being a practitioner, being a product head, the practical challenges of data-centric security and protecting data persistently to prevent data breaches or the impacts of data exfiltration. Those challenges actually led me to kind of think about a very different paradigm of how data needs to be protected, and remove the friction, remove the cost and the time and the effort that it takes otherwise with incumbent solutions. And that kind of led, the formation of Privaclave. Obviously, it has evolved, over the last 2 years, from when it was ideated and conceptualized to some practical implementations, and particularly in the age of AI. So I'd let Amit kind of provide his story as well.
Hi, Rosie. Thank you for having us here. Amit Vaidya. So my journey, similar to Sid, also started over a decade ago in the security side, right? My background was in management and technology consulting, but then I jumped into managing a couple of security programs in the government space at the NIH and at Department of Energy. From there on, I got in at PNC, and I was leading their IAM and data protection spaces. And we'll talk a little bit more about data protection and some of the challenges that we really faced as practitioners working in that space, which is what led us to being here today.
Awesome. Well, look, like every founding story is kind of fantastic, but I think you guys have come from like a similar background. You've probably, I'm assuming, seen the pain points, like you said, from that practitioner side. For those that haven't come across kind of Privaclave before, what is the vision? What's the mission? What are you guys trying to achieve?
I think Amit actually puts that much better than me, and I'm going to just try to paraphrase his statement, but I think he'll do a better job. But I think when we started this, it was kind of obviously removing the friction and automating the process of data protection or protecting data. But I think where we have kind of seen that AI innovation is something that we need to enable, right? So we need to enable the enterprises to adopt AI safely and responsibly, and explore the full potential of the data and these large language models or the AI workflows that they're building to derive, the return over the investments that they're making. And one of the bottlenecks and the challenges and barriers have been data security and privacy. So what it happens is that it becomes a very compromising and a balancing act, to keep the data secure while still trying to explore the full potential of AI. And we just want to kind of ease that, path and basically enable the enterprises to innovate fast without having to worry about data privacy and security. I don't know, Amit, if you want to chime in.
Kind of going back to your question and what Sid was talking about was the adoption of these data security practices and products were a little bit challenging only because of the sheer amount of coding and reworking applications and databases to accept, the encrypted or tokenized data, and then how to use it in return, right? So that's where the adoption was so challenging. After running the program for a couple of years and struggling to get the adoption going from the line of businesses and application owners, just because they saw how much work it was. And, from a business perspective, you have to prioritize, how do I move fast for my business rather than, doing something from a security perspective, right? So that prioritization was always a constant battle that we had to fight. And as Sid mentioned, in the age of AI, you have to move fast. You have to innovate fast, right? And data protection still has to come to the table along with you to be able to move fast. So removing that friction and allowing companies to adopt AI quickly, I think that's where we saw the opportunity there.
So it seems like you guys have kind of come in at the perfect time, or maybe this should have happened, I don't know, a couple of years ago. But why do you think the industry kind of accepted this as like a standard before, obviously, Privaclave?
You mean accepted that this is how it is always, or this is how it should be and stuff? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, because I don't think the industry accepted that this is how it needs to be done. I think the industry moved away that if this is so hard, we were not going to do it, and we'll try to put compensating controls in order to protect our data. And that's where the exposure happens, right? Because we have whenever there is a battle about doing the right thing, but it takes a long time and it's very expensive, versus something that checks the box and it's easy and transparent, 9 out of 10 times, you will find enterprises ending on the ladder. And that's what, happens, given there is all the right intentions across any security professional, any application owner, any data owner to keep their data persistently protected. But it's the sheer amount of work and the complexity that is involved in the current paradigm. They shy away from doing that, or they can't afford it. I mean, not every company has that kind of a budget or the engineering muscle, to spend months and months of development and redesigning their applications. So they try the easier way out, right? I mean, what can we do as a bare minimum so that the auditors can come and provide them with, okay, you've got the basic foundation in place, but that doesn't guarantee that your data is not going to get exfiltrated and breached. And what AI kind of moved that needle so fast that some of these incumbent controls no longer practically apply when it comes to protecting the data. I don't know, Amit, you have a different take on that as well.
Not different, but I think I'm in alignment with what you shared. Most of these companies, right, because it was so hard, right, organizations shied away from adopting it, but they started innovating. They started figuring out, how can we make this simpler and easier? What AI did, as Sid called out, it accelerated how fast this can move, right? And that's what we leveraged as well to help us ease some of that pain, right? And I'm sure other companies or legacy companies are trying to think about how they can leverage AI to do the same, right? We just got there first.
And there's one important point is that the concept of privacy by design, privacy by default, I mean, for newer applications, you have that opportunity to build something, from the ground up with data security and privacy baked in, even though a lot of cases, enterprises don't do that. But the biggest challenge is with the legacy applications that have been running for so long. So the sheer amount of work to go back to these legacy applications and then redesign them in order to now do data security and privacy is excruciatingly painful and expensive. So even though you may actually come to a point of what's on the other side of the line, that there are new applications that we are developing, and in that case, let's do the right thing. But you've already missed out on the opportunity for the applications that have been running or have been developed way in the past. And then either you are like not focusing on those anymore because it is what it is. They've been running for so long and they're dealing with a lot of data. And then we try to do something that doesn't tamper with the application, because anytime you make a change in an application that's either business critical or something that has been running, you risk something going wrong and then some outage happening. So one of the thing that Privaclave introduced was that where you do not have to touch, the legacy applications and still, get data protected. So we kind of abstracted and decoupled the data protection mechanism and the process, outside of the stack, right? So that's where it was, perceived to be a much easier and a seamless integration opportunity because you don't have to go back and redesign your applications that have been running for so long, and you still want to get data protected.
It kind of leads into my next question. You mentioned about like having a couple of the legacy and more established players out there. Like you can name, like this data security space is huge, right? And it's probably a bit of a general term to use over a lot of the companies now. It's grown so massive. But I don't know, tools like a Varonis, for example, that have so many different capabilities, even like a Cyera, which is still technically a startup, even though the amount of like funding they've raised and how much they've grown.
Right.
But even they're kind of obviously acquiring different companies all the time and different capabilities. How is kind of Privaclave, I guess, like fitting into that ecosystem? Because it feels like you guys have kind of created a different solution to what's on the market at the moment. But like you said, as always, a Varonis could come along and very quickly, I guess, spin up a capability like this. How are you guys kind of fitting in and I guess differentiating yourselves?
Yeah, I think it's simple. Varonis, Cyrus of the world are predominantly DSPM or data security posture management tools. And we are complementary to that, right? Because what they do is discover, classify data, provide you insights on where data is, and potentially provide some risk analysis on it, for analysts or security teams to get an understanding of where the risks lies, and then obviously gives you an inventory of the data stores. But the line is drawn very clear. They don't protect, right?
Yeah.
So I think
They give
obviously
visibility.
right, the visibility aspect. So the visibility or the insights and the action that needs to be taken, there's still a chasm, that needs to be crossed. And even though there are some acquisitions that they have made where they're adding capabilities like DLP, data loss prevention, which are solutions that are installed at the edges, at the egress points, and sometimes at the endpoints, and their predominantly function is to alert on any sensitive data leakage or block. Right. So where we came in is in the aspect of how do you move from insights to action in a single automated function, right? Because when data is at rest and within the data stores, that's not where the risk lies, right? We can put, and build bigger walls around those data stores. But the moment the data moves away from those platforms, that's where it starts to become vulnerable. And particularly with AI, that movement has amplified and essentially a lot of cases uncontrollable, right? Because before legacy applications were designed with very solid guardrails in what data you collect, what data stores you integrate with, where do you send that data, store that data, process or share. With AI assistants, co-pilots, AI agents, that landscape has increased, and then some of the times autonomously, these data retrieval processes are happening. So the focus was on when the data moves, how you enforce the action or the policies at runtime. So when we created the new category, as we call it, Runtime Data Insights and Protection, RDIP. So the entire operation is about not getting an inventory of where data is stored, but how do you get insights when data starts to move at runtime? And then you have that ability to enforce that action immediately. So while DSPMs are discovering where the data is, and then of course highlighting or providing that insights into a dashboard, and then sometimes people have to prioritize where the highest risks are, then implement additional tools, in order to reduce that risk or remediate that risk. Privaclave is doing that at runtime in both cases, providing you the insights of what's flowing, where it's flowing, where it is flowing from, what's the context behind this flow, and then intelligently making those runtime decisions in what to desensitize and stuff. In fact, we are integrating with DSPMs in a lot of cases, with Microsoft Purview being one of the industry standard products. A lot of enterprises use them. So we consume their metadata in order to find, where sensitive data lives. We are even appending or labeling with Microsoft Purview's MIP labels and SITs, so that downstream, if some data flows and Privaclave has classified at runtime, even edge products like DLP can read, those MIP labels and SITs and make some decisions either to alert or to block. So it's a ecosystem that it's all interconnected. I mean, DSPMs are not going to replace data desensitization platforms, and data desensitization platforms are not going to replace DSPM. In a lot of cases, they are converging, and sometimes the platformization process is happening within big vendors that they are just acquiring these technologies to have a very unified platform that provides a lot of these capabilities that typically individual vendors offered in isolation. So that convergence is happening. But when it comes to like, oh, I have a Varonis or I have a Cyra, why do I need Privaclave? These are two different things, right? Yeah. So you need, from a data governance perspective, the DSPMs to kind of understand your data landscape and where the risks are, where we are storing what type of data. But when it comes to protection, you need solutions, like data desensitization solution, data tokenization solutions, where Privaclave or some of the incumbent data tokenization solutions are already there. We just do it much better, and we automate the whole thing. We do it frictionlessly, so the customers or the enterprises do not have to feel the pain in order to persistently protect data.
Yeah, that was going to be a follow-up question, to be honest. So you kind of answered it in terms of like, surely there's like a partnership or integration route for you guys to work with like these big DSPM kind of vendors, because probably about 2 years ago now, that was very much the buzzword in data security, right? But it seems like you've already kind of kicked off that process. If you're working or integrating with Microsoft, it feels like that could grow quite quickly.
Right. And of course, this is an agnostic solution. So, we've reached out to other DSPM vendors as well. In fact, there's another DSPM vendor who is also a DSAR vendor who kind of does privacy rights management. So because then they are talking to their customers, there's like one aspect of, okay, I need to address the privacy rights. I also need to inventory my data and discover and classify data, but I also need to tokenize or encrypt or, protect the data. So in that case, there's a partnership, with us for these vendors that, okay, where we start, the process, Privaclave kind of gets to the remediation point. So we are discovering risk, and Privaclave is remediating that. And the best part about the remediation process with Privaclave is that it's 90% lower total cost of ownership, because we kind of cut down on the entire engineering effort that typically with incumbent solutions that you'll have to, and then we just automate the whole thing and make it runtime, and we are agnostic to all the platforms. So it doesn't matter what stack they are running on, which cloud they're running on, whether they're on premises or in different cloud providers. So that kind of makes it very easy for enterprises to adopt us.
Yeah, like you said, it's like a seamless adoption, right? If you can cover that. Awesome. Well, look, we could probably dive more into that and kind of partnerships on the business side. But I think kind of when it comes to our listeners, they love like a use case or scenarios where Privaclave, I guess, can fit into their ecosystem. You've kind of touched upon like AI, like co-pilots, but where else, or give us a bit more color to that?
Yeah, I'll let Amit kind of start that, because obviously there are legacy use cases as well, and then of course the modern AI use cases. So, Amit, why don't you kind of start, and then I'll see where I can.
From a legacy use case perspective, right? Storing data in a tokenized way, right? That's something where Privaclave can come in. And as you're creating data and getting ready to store it, that's where we can help either tokenize or encrypt the data. And at use as well for that data. In other use cases, it's more around when we're talking about data sovereignty, right? Especially for large global companies. If you are serving customers that are in EU and US, right? There are very strict rules under GDPR on who can access that data. So Privaclave can help in letting organizations store that data still in the same data stores, but obfuscate data for EU data for Europe, for US users, right, or analysts, and vice versa. So those are some two very prominent legacy use cases where it can help. And then I'll let Sid kind of jump in on the AI side of it. on how Privaclave supports that.
Yeah, and also, you have the production to non-production, data migrations, all of that, with test data management, or even from a training data perspective, AI models as well. So we desensitize that at runtime. And on the AI use cases, obviously, you have a lot of applications that are wrapping, these LLMs, and then sending a lot of data, to infer, to reason on them or to summarize on them. So that's another risk, particularly with the frontier models when they're calling, the OpenAIs or Anthropics, or even sometimes, let's say, the Chinese, models like DeepSeek. Enterprises have a fair amount of shadow AI that, goes around. So where they don't know what models are being used in a lot of cases, and even if they are known, there is a tremendous amount, a leap of faith that is being put into these LLMs, that I'll send my patient data or customer data, and that data is essentially not going to get exposed. So what we're doing is, in that case, we are intercepting that flow and then analyzing on that, what type of sensitive data it is and what sort of context is behind that. Of course, you need to send the LLMs certain data that it will be required for them to do the work. But in a lot of cases, a lot of data just are being sent, which the LLMs typically don't need it. So we are desensitizing that on the fly. So that's like one of those where we are having applications that are integrating with LLMs. Copilots would be another, where a single prompt essentially is having the copilots go out and tap into multiple data stores and exposing data to users, right? And then there are some insider risks, because one of the aspects of AI is that, particularly with our current solutions, with IAM, role-based access control or attribute-based access control, who the person is making the prompt, what type of data stores they have access to, what sort of permissions they have access to. But those systems don't understand what's the intent behind that prompt, right? Because the intent analysis is another thing around that. Even though I have access to that data source, a Copilot will get that data out for me, but there is some sort of a malicious or a non-BAU intent behind taking that data. And in that case, the data can get exposed, which can get copied over, or a screenshot could be taken. All of that risks are there. So we kind of intercept some of those flows, as well as data kind of comes out. We are desensitizing that as well. Other cases, you have AI agents, which are orchestrator agents or MCP clients, and talking to MCP servers, getting a lot of data from different healthcare systems or financial systems. In that case, a lot of times you don't want some of the sensitive information like patient PHI to get exposed to these agents. And while agents are talking to each other, where orchestrator agents are talking to some specialized agents to do pieces of the task, right, in an agentic AI framework. In those cases, we are also analyzing the flows and seeing if there is anything sensitive, and as per the context, whether certain data elements need to be desensitized on the fly or not. So there's like multiple, use cases that, Privaclave kind of fits in, because the thing is that you can't pre-wire, these agents or copilots, with SDKs and encryption libraries or tokenization APIs. So they have to do their work, and there has to be something running in that AI pipeline or the data pipeline that needs to seamlessly and frictionlessly intercept and make those decisions on the fly. So that's where I think, to name a few of the various use cases.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like agentic AI, I know it's obviously been a kind of a buzzword for the last like 18 months or so now. It was awesome when it kind of got introduced into security, but now actually we're needing to protect against kind of also what these AI agents are capable of as well. So yeah, there's awesome. Look, I'm sure there's going to be kind of these use cases increasing over the next kind of year or so. And obviously, as you guys continue to grow, in terms of, I guess, kind of what's next, we always like to kind of end these podcasts thinking about the growth and what you're expecting kind of over the next year. Obviously, not giving away anything too secret, but where are you expecting to see yourself in the next, I guess, year to 3 years?
Yeah, I think it's a loaded question. I'll give my take, and of course, Amit can give his. I think in the AI world, when it comes to security, runtime is the key word, right? Because at the end of the day, you're statically pre-designed, pre-wired security controls are just not going to scale. Because we would end up with more AI agents than humans, and potentially 10x at a lot of enterprises. And security just has to follow, right? And wherever the data is moving and where these transactions are happening. So the world is going to shift, to a runtime, insights and enforcement. And I think where we are kind of placed very well in that case, because we build that thing from the ground up using that paradigm. So I think where we see ourselves in the next couple, 3 years is essentially pioneering that model. And a lot of ecosystem players are also going to, come with us to integrate, because you're already seeing in the cloud security posture management side, and there are certain tools that are obviously, working at runtime and leveraging their AI to make decisions and find alerts and reduce threats or prevent, these attacks. So that's the paradigm in those areas where they're more on the security operations side. Identity access management will kind of flow in a very similar, path. And of course, all of these different frameworks and philosophies, like zero trust, they already talk and preach about that model. But in reality, from a practical implementation standpoint, with the current tools, that hasn't really happened across the board. I mean, there are probably a few pieces that are already following those paradigms. But when it comes to data security or persistently protecting data or data-centric security, I think we have kind of led that charge, right? So how to kind of protect data at runtime and move from insights to action, within that same automated flow, so that you do not have to worry about understanding first where my sensitive data is, then understanding who has access to it, and then get a bunch of alerts and dashboards to figure out what to prioritize, and then figure out what tools to implement to start remediation, and then how long does it take for us to remediate that. I think we have gone past that. I mean, if we are still following that old playbook, the enterprises are not going to be able to keep up, with the threats and the exposure. So the runtime aspect, and we have to make it frictionless, right? The moment you add more friction and work, for the engineering teams that are managing the data and managing the AI agents or the co-pilots, you'll have to not be a barrier, and security just needs to be there, right, without them having to worry about it. I don't know, Amit, what's your take on that?
No, I couldn't say it any better than what you've already articulated, Sid. The one thing I would just add is removing the complexity in how to manage this, right? I think that's the key in how we enable organizations to move at the pace of AI, right? And that's going to be the key in how well, where every organization needs to succeed. So.
Awesome. Well, I know we're
Well
all
said.
excited to see. Yeah, it was a great answer to the question. We're all excited to see kind of how the next year plays out for you both. Obviously, we'll drop kind of in the comments links to get in contact if anyone has any questions. But is there a better way to reach out, or is it direct to both of you?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously, we're very active on LinkedIn, and of course, Privaclave website is also there, privaclave.ai. We got our LinkedIn page as well. So there are all of the channels that people can reach out to us. Book an appointment. That's on my profile as well, on the LinkedIn profiles, and anytime they can get to see a demo, and we can discuss. So yeah, and absolutely, we're going to provide our email addresses and stuff like that, to get added to the comment for people to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rosie, for having us.
Awesome. That is all done. It's like